Thank you for coming to our book launch for Unions in the City Negotiating Urban Change. My name is Ian MacDonald. I'm the editor of the volume, and I teach at the École de Relations Industrielles at Université de Montréal. I will introduce our panel in a bit, but beforehand I'd like to thank them for their willingness to come out and share their thoughts with us. We could have had the authors talk for maybe the third or fourth time about their work, but I think it'll be interesting for everyone concerned to hear what people who are centrally involved in these campaigns have to say about our work. I'm especially thankful because we rarely get the opportunity to get this kind of feedback, so I'm very interested to hear what they're going to say. I think they're the only people who've read the book so far, because it's not coming out until mid-June. You can order it. There's a pamphlet up here with information on how to order it. The book is a collaboration between labor researchers and geographers who were based at York but have moved on since then, and some of them, and Cornell. The Toronto authors are here in the room, so I'd like to identify James Nugent at U of T, Simon Black at Brock, Steve Tufts at York, and Thorben, who works now for Unite Here. I should mention the New York authors by name: Lois Gray, Casey Wagner, Mildred Warner, Maria Figueroa, and Susanna Schaller, who's at City College Center for Work Education. Very briefly on the book, and then we're going to let the panel respond to it. There'll be a number of books published over the past 10 years on labor in the city, and I wanted to tell you why I thought that there should be another one. What is different about this book, and what I hope is useful. What I didn't want to do was to produce just an academic critique. I wanted to produce something more like a map that identifies where we see the possibilities for labor strategies that lead to labor renewal in an urban context. I also wanted to identify where we see the limits of these strategies and to explain where those limits come from and why they're important. And perhaps most importantly, I wanted to point to the contradictions or dilemmas that unions are facing, partly for external reasons, but partly for reasons that are internal to unions as institutions. And I wanted to emphasize that point because when you're facing a dilemma, you have to make a choice, and that choice is a political choice. And I think that political choice matters for the future of the labor movement. So the book is written for the labor movement, and I really hope that it's useful. There are a couple of aspects of the analysis that I wanted to mention very briefly. It's a sectoral analysis, so we're looking at how unions relate to other actors in their sector in film, hospitality, green energy, and childcare. And the reason we took that sectoral analysis was to be more realistic about labor's prospects, and especially the prospects for labor renewal. We wanted to recognize that labor is not just relating to communities, whether that's understood in identity or class terms, but also to very powerful economic actors, employers, developers, who have a much more powerful effect on how urban space is being restructured, and of course they have very different motivations. Their motivations are profit. So we recognize that they have more power, but we wanted to understand how labor is responding or relating to those actors, sometimes in interesting and contradictory ways. The other aspect that's interesting about the book, and I think hopeful, useful, is we're evaluating labor strategy on two levels. So we're asking the question, is labor successful in defending their institutional level interests? Are they able to organize new workers? Are they able to reproduce their bargaining relationships with employers? Are they able to defend employment and contract terms? But we're also interested in the social or urban implications of these strategies, which we think is important for the question of labor renewal. Are these victories being bought at the expense of gentrification? Are they being bought at the expense of tax cuts that are undermining public services? What kind of city is Labour producing? Is it going to be a city that is socially just, that allows working class communities to organize, to cohere? Is it, on the contrary, fragmenting working classes? We think that's an important question, and the book frames that question in an urban lens. So that's how I understand what's new and hopefully useful about the book. I'd like to introduce the speakers. Sarah Ryan is a senior research officer with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. She undertakes research on childcare and privatization nationally. She loves supporting members to develop creative campaigns that maintain, strengthen, and take back public services. So, Sarah.
Thank you very much. I found the book to be really useful in thinking about how we engage in campaigns, and extremely practical to our work as well. The chapter I'm going to be speaking about compared two campaigns, one which was successful and one which wasn't, to protect municipal public childcare. So this was between Peel, where we lost the campaign, and Toronto, where we won the campaign to protect childcare. So some of the elements that were identified as kind of helping with the campaign's success were having municipal councillors as childcare champions, having at least some progressive councillors on city council, having city staff on side. He also highlighted the role of the activists, the established activist base within the city, or the infrastructure of dissent, as well as building labor and community coalitions. So one of the things he spoke about was, in these two campaigns, CUPE played a fairly background role. They played very much an enabling role for the campaign. In Toronto, this was in part because there had been a recent municipal strike. In Peel, CUPE didn't actually represent the affected members, but was supporting the campaign as a strategic campaign to protect municipal childcare across the province. In some ways, this was a bit of an anomaly, because usually in municipal childcare campaigns, CUPE is more out front, and CUPE members are very much kind of key voices in coalition with other groups. In Toronto, there was a very established activist base. In a lot of other municipalities where we've had these struggles, that hasn't been the case. But the activist base, I would separate out from kind of labor community coalitions, and that's something that we've always worked to foster through these campaigns, especially with service users, public service users, when there are public service cutbacks, to work with people who are affected by the cuts. So in the case of municipal childcare, that would be parents. And of course, that's incredibly critical. You want a worker's voice, and I think childcare workers are trusted in speaking about childcare as well. They're trusted in speaking about childcare policy, and that might be linked to the care work that they do. And it's not always the case for all unionized members. But childcare workers are, viewed very positively and trusted when they speak about childcare. But having parents speak as well, and parents out front on this kind of a campaign, talking about, the services that they receive and how it's going to impact their lives to have a cut, is also really critical. And we've run across some really great parent activists that, thinking about longer term, it would be good to figure out how we can transition these parent activists into kind of broader childcare advocacy or political social justice advocacy within their communities. But I think, the role of members in these campaigns, in my mind, is, that's critical, right? And these kinds of campaigns are also opportunities in some ways to mobilize members, politicize members, build capacity to be able to take on these types of struggles. So That's something that I think always needs to be a major focus within these campaigns. The chapter I found as well really highlighted that we need a long-term strategy, because a lot of the elements, you couldn't just, all these campaigns, they started with KPMG, municipal service reviews, and every single one is like, well, you should cut your municipal childcare because it's expensive, and you don't have time to develop, an infrastructure of dissent, community organizations, social justice organizations. You don't have time to elect municipal councillors who are progressive or understand childcare. So all of these things need to be part of a long-term municipal urban strategy where you're doing that work that maybe at that time doesn't seem as immediate. Maybe there's no immediate struggle, but you're putting in the time and the planning to actually build up those structures so that when something happens, then you can take it on much more effectively. We've talked about developing, because unfortunately these two campaigns to protect municipal childcare haven't been the only campaigns. There's been, ever since 2012 and changes to the childcare funding formula provincially, we've been hit with, a number of attempts to close municipal childcare centers. So really kind of developing, those municipal council watch structures as well, so that CUPE locals really understand what's happening at municipal council, the decisions that are being made, because I'm not going to say that we haven't been caught off guard, right, in some cases as well, unfortunately. I think the issue of scale is also really interesting, and looking at these two examples. These were, two specific municipal cases, but now we've had, over the long term, it's a lot of closures, right, and a lot of campaigns. And just in the past few years, there's probably been about 4 or 5 campaigns. And so, taking a step back and saying, can we move up and focus on the province? Because when you're fighting these closure campaigns, location by location, in some areas where we have strength, and we have a lot of those elements that help us win these campaigns, but in some areas we don't have strength. And so if we could focus all of our energy and resources on one target, a provincial strategy, that may have been a very good way to go. I also think, reading the chapter, thinking about how we frame these campaigns is also worth thinking about. Because in some cases we've really kind of highlighted quality. Municipal childcare is the highest quality childcare. And the research shows that that's true. Like municipal childcare, not-for-profit childcare, for-profit childcare on the very, very bottom in terms of quality. But especially in some locations where relationships haven't been built between the public childcare and the not-for-profit childcare community, that quality argument and the way it's been framed has been divisive. And you really want that community all saying, don't close the municipal childcare center. You don't want the not-for-profit saying, hey, we can get the spaces, because that's generally where the spaces go. So I think we need to figure out ways of framing this that build solidarity rather than foster divisiveness. Another thing that's crossed my mind with these campaigns is that we haven't called the real question, that the reason why it's cheaper to provide childcare in the not-for-profit sector is, for the most part, is because wages are so much lower for childcare workers. You have a difference of $30+ an hour versus around $16 an hour in the community sector. So that cost savings is because the predominantly female workforce in the community sector are paid so poorly. And we haven't really taken that head on in these campaigns. And I do wonder whether that would be an interesting strategy going forward. Because one of the arguments that's used as well is that you're actually creating more childcare spaces. By closing public childcare, you're moving that same amount of money into the not-for-profit sector, and you're creating more childcare spaces. So that is a hard argument to tackle, because, you know, it's like we're getting more for our money, right? But at what cost? Why is that the case? And then I think we can also think, again, this is a longer-term strategy, but taking a step back, if we built union density across the childcare sector, across the public and not-for-profit childcare sector, that would make it much easier to take on these campaigns effectively and to take on like provincial political advocacy campaigns. Not to say that there is a lot of activity in Ontario. There's a very active, you know, political childcare coalition, and political advocacy for childcare workers has been a real focus in Ontario, which is amazing, including not just through unions. It's also through the broader, even like educational institutions in Ontario, which is, or at least some of them, that train early childhood educators. But if we can boost unionization, you know, have coordinated bargaining, and really kind of increase, like lessen that differential between public childcare and not-for-profit, that would also help, but also with a political strategy. So I just wanted to close by saying, I mean, these two municipal campaigns were defensive campaigns to protect public childcare. But, I mean, public childcare is, like, it sets the standard for the entire province, right? It does, in terms of quality, in terms of, like, responsive services for communities, in terms of wages. But alongside these defensive campaigns, there's also been a really strong proactive campaign within the childcare sector to push for publicly funded, public not-for-profit childcare system for everyone. So that's a nice, you know, complement, I think, for, you know, defensive is having the proactive campaign going as well.
Ciccarelli, to my left here, has been involved in community organizing for over 35 years and is an activist in neighborhood sustainability in Toronto. He was co-founder and coordinator of the Mount Dennis Weston Network, which engaged with the City, Toronto Transit Commission, and the province's Regional Transportation Authority, Metrolinx, on transit infrastructure and community benefits.
In the introductory remarks in Ian's book, he talks about the common strand throughout being social unionism. And I'll paraphrase, extending representative function both to non-unionized workers and to the many ways union members can be mobilized as democratic citizens. I suggested in James's section on struggling for good green jobs, we extend that. It goes further. Unionists are working collaboratively with community activists who aren't necessarily engaged in jobs as their primary focus. So building the agenda for what we call finally called community benefits, is a wider agenda than what the union movement has traditionally been involved in, as far as I'm aware. The community benefits has been generated through union involvement, most definitely in places outside of Toronto, US, UK. But in terms of what we're looking at, union organizing has tended to focus on union members and working on union issues in collaboration with the community. This is flipping that, so that the union is getting engaged in the community's issues. It's about creating a common agenda, and I'll talk a bit later on what the community benefits approach is. I'd like to start by placing myself into the context of James's piece in Mount Dennis. My background was 25 years, as Ian mentioned, as a community development officer, later a policy planner with the City of Toronto, the pre-amalgamated City of Toronto mostly, working in neighborhood renewal, in social economic innovations, in healthy cities. Near the end of that, I went to Johannesburg for the World Summit on Sustainability. And that was briefly after I had been at a conference in New York on volunteerism at the UN during what turned out to be 9/11. So those experiences kind of sensitized me to coming back to Toronto, looking at communities from a different perspective, a more urgent perspective of how do we get people to learn about the change that's needed for sustainability. Did a brief stint with commercial real estate, learned about how the urban development industry is doing, is applying corporate social responsibility, and how green real estate's being promoted. Then I landed in MacDonald as a resident and as a struggling consultant. Mike isn't here. Mike Sullivan was at that time organizing mostly in Weston and starting to organize around the deindustrialization of the rail corridor. We'd lost, as mentioned in James's piece, Mike had shown how 10,000 jobs had moved out of the community as real estate pressures gave the industry owners reason either to relocate into greenlands around the suburbs, the edges of the suburbs, or right out of Toronto, right out of Canada in some cases. So our network was formed on the basis of trying to turn that around, trying to find a way to address both place the struggle that was happening from the collapse of the economy and participation, the engagement of community. James has done an admirable job in layering the history and the social demographics of Mount Dennis, but I just wanted to highlight, because usually when I've done talks about Mount Dennis, people go, where the hell is Mount Dennis? And why does it matter? So I just wanted to focus a bit on a couple of points. One is that if you take the Up Express, Mount Dennis is halfway to the airport from Union Station. It's the crossroads of Eglinton Avenue West and Weston Row. It's where the former Kodak plant used to be for Kodak Canada. After the collapse of industry in Toronto, it now ranks third out of 142 neighborhoods on the city's equity list. Out of 100 points in the urban heart model, it gets 26. The city staff says that anything under 46 is in severe need of getting addressed around inequity. So our network came together, the Mount Dennis Community Association, the Weston Community Coalition, ACORN, Mount Dennis United Church, which is now closed, or since closed, the Anglican Church of Good Shepherd, which is since amalgamated with 3 other Anglican churches, Social Planning Council, and the then newly formed Action for Neighborhood Change, Toronto Public Library, Learning Enrichment Foundation, Labour Council, represented by Julius Deutsch, and faculty and students along the course of the definition of our work, from Ryerson, York, George Brown, OISE, U of T. A real resource on learning, because what we needed to do was learn how to move forward. the community's community improvement junkie's dream. It has old housing stock in need of fixing, high-rises in need of tower renewal, schools and hospital needing overhaul, green space galore as long as you don't mind the flood risk. It's got a pre-art scene, survivor businesses along the strip, an employment area or unemployment area where manufacturing struggles to stay alive, dilapidated infrastructure. Recent additions include a recreation center that was supposed to be delivered 10 years ago, a library that was closed to the neighborhood for 2 years while it had its renovations done. TTC hybrid bus barn and Canada Post District sorting delivery depot have moved in as new industry. Mount Dennis has a lot of committed people who want to see a better community. And they come at that from a social justice perspective. The vision statement of the network is in James's work. Through the policy and practice of sustainable development, York Southwestern develops a strong economy in which all people can live to their potential, are engaged, are respected, and can prosper within a clean and healthy environment. A dream, not a fantasy. It sets out a wide vision that you can do a lot of stuff on. And we tried to figure out how we connect into the new economy, not because it was a fantasy, but because we knew that the new economy, the green economy, would require new ways of working, new jobs, new technologies, new clean tech. And some of that could locate in this community, if we could figure that out. So we went through a learning process. We looked at green energy, sustainable transportation, green building design, compact urban form. We looked at how to protect natural space and deal with brownfields, how green enterprise can happen on retail strips, how eco-business can happen in the employment districts. We looked at food security and the kinds of jobs that might happen through it. Community agriculture, learning, research, innovations. And we landed on the transit investment that was going on with Eglinton Crosstown as the best place to make community impact, to start. I'll fast forward. Reaching across the crosstown was the strategy, connecting with other communities like Mount Dennis, building the power, looking at how to then connect in equity groups, equity-seeking groups through labor's contacts mostly, build with partnerships with the trades involved in construction activities, and with other workforce development organizations. Toronto Community Benefits Network, launched in 2013, negotiated terms with Metrolinx, a $5.5 billion project, on apprenticeship jobs, on professional administrative and technical jobs, social enterprise, put that into the RFP. And I think that that's an important distinction around trying to negotiate with a private sector developer. You've got to get into the procurement process. If you don't, it will bypass you. I'm going to move ahead a fair bit. I think James had indicated that the network in its aspirations was a failure, but not a failure. And I would suggest that, in fact, we're playing the long ball game. Since the publishing of this section, we've had Metrolinx in the province, United Way, commit with Toronto Community Benefits to a declaration on aspirations for the crosstown. You can take it or leave it. I think that it's an important advance to the way that government is committing to deal with creating economic opportunities through infrastructure. But we've also pushed back on the way that Metrolinx had planned to use community energy. They were planning a gas plant as part of the maintenance and storage facility. We've got them to reconsider that. They're now working with Toronto Hydro on an energy storage solution, 20 megawatts. We've got the city doing a community energy plan, and Mount Dennis has been designated as a zero greenhouse gas, a zero growth neighborhood. So we've got the opportunity to work with Metrolinx around some of the surplus land that's been created with the design, the site plan. And we're still looking to build, to see a green center of excellence built on that site. My takeaways: think big, start small, move fast. Build allies, work in solidarity for each other's objectives. Learn, exchange knowledge, keep learning, and with government and private sector, play the long ball game and watch the way you build partnerships with them. Thank you.